And now, live from the studios of Freedom's Phoenix, Ernest Hancock.
Turn on the tube, what do I see? A whole lot of people crying, don't blame me. They point the crooked little fingers, everybody else. Spend all the time feeling sorry for themselves. Victim of this, victim of that. Your mama's too thin and your daddy too fat. Get over it. Get over it. All this running and crying, bitching and fit. Get over it.
Yeah, get over it, man. It's just, let's get some truth, justice, and what used to be the American way, whatever the heck that was. Let's go ahead and find out what the American way is now from Lieutenant Eric Shine. He's sharing with us how the Coast Guard, because he's in the Merchant Marine, he's kind of in there. I think he was in the Navy at one time. He's got his website. We got it all linked up on freedomsphoenix.com for today's show, and you can go check him out. Now, he was very adamant about getting over to the Freedom Summit and he saw the lineup and said, ooh, these boys need to know what I know. Okay, well, let's see what he knows. Well, he's sharing with us now how when they started the TSA, they started the Homeland Security, they need an infrastructure, a mechanism, a law enforcement ability. Well, the Coast Guard kind of has this. Let's go ahead and ask you that, Eric. This is a question I have. The Coast Guard, traditionally, when it started and so on, what was it? Who did they answer to? And then now it's starting to, you start getting Homeland Security, you might as well just call it the fatherland, Gestapo, Central Command, de la, we get to do what the heck we want kind of thing. So go ahead and, give me a summary real quick of this, and then we'll get into more of your goodies. Go ahead.
Well, it started out under Hamilton, and if anybody studies Hamilton, there's some questions as to his loyalty, if not even royal perspective to some degree. He formed what is called the Revenue Cutter Marine, and this was intentionally, or initially, it was a good idea because it was to impose tariffs upon foreign and mostly royal interests, and to preclude taxes upon individuals. To actually impose, and 100% of our government ran off of these tariffs up into the 1930s, rather than taxes being imposed upon our citizens, where they, must give evidence against themselves without any kind of charges being brought against them that can and will be used against them in a court of law. But the Coast Guard, eventually in 1915, under Wilson, in the middle of World War I, the Coast Guard was created, and in it, when it was created, it took under all these other commands, like the Lighthouse Service, the Life-Saving Service, the Revenue Cutter Marine, and a bunch of other very benign services that were all civil services. Many of them started as volunteer services, and one has to ask himself, how do you get from the ice-breaking service, the life-saving service, the Lighthouse Service, and other services like that to a special branch of military that can administer, police, regulate, and enforce and even adjudicate and thus make civilian law.
Yeah,
and what they've done, and I'll tell you what they've done, under the Coast Guard after World War II, because it was subsumed into the War Department in the midst of World War II, so it became part of the War Department. After the war, the Defense Department was created in lieu of the Geneva Conventions and more to outlaw wars of aggression. So we created a Defense Department. The Coast Guard was moved out of it. It was not included in the Department of Defense, and it was put under Title 14 as a civil service. Even the Brits, the United Kingdom, a royal, kingdom, a constitutional monarchy, their Coast Guard is still a civil service. They know and understand this. And what they've done is they've taken Title 14, which is what the Coast Guard was placed in after World War II, as a federal maritime police agency, a civil service, and they've trained them over the years on the UCMJ and Title 10. In the event that in a surge capacity, like say Vietnam, Korea, even what we're going through now, the first Gulf War or this Gulf War, or war on terrorism, that if the Navy needed, and as a surge contingency, needed small boat handlers and people who were somewhat trained and wore a uniform and could handle weapons to a degree, they would be brought into the Navy. They would become part of the Navy under DOD. And then all their police and regulatory powers would be shed. So that's under Title 14, which is outside of DOD. DOD is Title 10. They were trained on the UCMJ and Title 10 in case of that event where they were brought in. But the Coast Guard also works alongside the Navy in drug interdiction cases as a civilian law enforcement agency to protect the Navy from violating posse comitatus. Posse Comitatus is the core to this. The Coast Guard was granted an exception to Posse Comitatus under Title 14 because it's not a branch of military. So what they've done in 2003 is they married not only the training that the Coast Guard would get or gets in the event that they go into the Navy, and Title 14 that they are under as a civilian civil service, a police law enforcement agency, and Title 10, and when they moved them into Homeland Security, married all these things together and started to openly declare that the Coast Guard is now and has been since 1915 or all the way back to 1790 in the creation of the Revenue Cutter Marine, a special branch of military outside of the confines of the Department of Defense. So they've effectively moved military law, which is a form of martial law, out of the Department of Defense, using the Coast Guard to do it, and into Homeland Security. And they are carrying on Article 32 military tribunals of American civilians right now in this country under the Coast Guard.
Such as?
I'm enduring it myself. They've stripped me of my rank as a naval officer, declared me to be a civilian, and because of my training as a naval officer, the Coast Guard has had me in what they're declaring as a civilian an Article 32 proceeding for the last 8 years. March 6, 2003, 2 weeks before the launching of the war in Iraq, they brought charges against me and have held me in this quote-unquote quasi-military tribunal. And it is a military tribunal because when you look at the character of the court, the prosecutor is a JAG officer in uniform of the Coast Guard. A JAG officer is a military attorney. If anybody's watched the TV program JAG, they'll know and understand it a little bit better. But JAG is short for Judge Advocate General. He's a commissioned military officer. And the Coast Guard is saying that they are, and if you go to their website, it's www.uscg.mil, that they are a branch of military in Homeland Security. Can't have that. Any and all constitutional branches of military must be in the Department of Defense. They were confined there for a reason. And so what they've done with the Coast Guard, and this is a whole little, this has been in planning for quite some time, but you also have to look at what's going on with the bailout, home mortgage scandal, and more, the wars, etc. This was done in 2003, well before the financial demise that we now find ourselves in. So this is all being planned to move the country and the American citizens under military rule, under military dictatorship, under martial law. And this has happened since 2003.
Okay, I got a beat on it. Now, when we come back from this next break, I want to make sure that we understand how it's happening on the ground. I mean, I can see the framework. I can see certainly the incentive and the intent. What I'm really concerned with is how that's going. Now we can see where they claiming jurisdiction over you, having had been in the military, having had been in the merchant marine, having had been in whatever they're claiming jurisdiction, and then they're going to use that as a thread to start expanding it even more and more and more until I'm in their net. Well, when we come back, we're going to have Lieutenant Eric Shine explain it to us even more. This is stuff that we just need to know. Put on your radar screen. You got his website up here, lieutenantéricshine.org, LTEricShine.org. Go check it out, and you'll see that it's just more goodies you need to know, or more baddies. It depends on your perspective. We'll be right back.